The 2 shillings coin of 1956, often referred to as the florin, is an interesting piece of British currency that reflects both the heritage and evolution of the British monetary system during the reign of Queen Elizabeth. The inscription on the coin reads Elizabeth Gift, which is abbreviated Latin for Elizabeth by the grace of God, Queen, Defender of the Faith. This phrase, known as a royal title, has been used on British coinage for centuries, signifying the monarch's divine right to rule and her position as the head of the Church of England. The use of Latin on the coin underscores Britain's long historical continuity and connection to traditional European numismatic practices. The 1956 2 shillings coin was minted early in Queen Elizabeth II's reign, just 4 years after she ascended the throne in 1952 and 3 years after her coronation in 1953. The coin was part of the pre-decimal British currency system, where £1 sterling, £1, equaled 20 shillings, and each shilling was 12 pence, making the florin worth 24 pence, or 1/10 of a pound. The florin was originally introduced in 1849 during the reign of Queen Victoria as part of an early attempt to move toward a decimal currency system. Although the full decimalization would not occur until 1971, the florin remained an important intermediate denomination in circulation for more than a century. The obverse front of the 1956 coin features the first definitive portrait of Queen Elizabeth designed by Mary. This youthful portrait depicts the Queen wearing a laurel wreath, symbolizing peace and victory, rather than the crown that appeared in later portraits. Gillick's design was notable for its elegance and simplicity, capturing the optimism and renewal that characterized Britain's post-war era. Around the portrait runs the Latin inscription, Elizabeth de Gratia FD, with FD standing for Defensor, meaning Defender of the Faith, a title originally granted to King Henry VIII by the Pope before England's split with Rome. The reverse back of the coin, designed by Edgar Fuller and Cecil Thomas, shows a detailed Tudor rose in the center, flanked by a thistle, a shamrock, and a leek, representing England, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales respectively, symbolizing the unity of the 4 nations under one crown. The inscription around the design reads 2 shillings 1956, clearly identifying its denomination and date of minting. This floral motif design is typical of the period, blending heraldic tradition with modern simplicity. In terms of composition, the 1956 florin was made of a mixture of copper and nickel, rather than silver. This change had in 1947 when post-war Britain ceased using silver in its circulating coins to cut costs. Earlier florins, such as those minted before 1947, were composed of 50% silver, and before 1920, 92.5% sterling silver. The move to base metals reflected the economic realities of the time, but maintained the coin's dimensions and general appearance for familiarity in circulation. The coins were durable and practical for daily use, which made them well-suited for Britain's increasingly industrial and consumer-oriented post-war economy. The 1956 2 shillings coin was minted by the Royal Mint, which at that time was still located on Tower Hill in London. Tens of millions were produced, meaning that while it is not a rare coin in terms of mintage, it holds significant historical and sentimental value, especially to collectors interested in the early coinage of Queen Elizabeth. Many people who lived through the 1950s and 1960s would have used this coin regularly, making it a familiar part of everyday British life until decimalization. When Britain finally decimalized its currency in 1971, the florin effectively became redundant. However, because its value, 1/10 of a pound, was conveniently equivalent to 10 new pence, the coin continued to circulate as a coin for several years after decimalization. The smaller coin was eventually introduced in 1992, and the larger florins were gradually withdrawn from circulation. Today, the 1956 florin remains a popular collectible, valued for its design. Next top. The 1962 2 shillings coin, also known of the pre-decimal British currency system that existed before the United Kingdom adopted decimalization in 1971. The coin's denomination, 2 shillings, was equivalent to 1/10 of a pound sterling, or 24 old pence in the old system, where 12 pence made a shilling and 20 shillings made a pound. The florin itself has a rich historical background that stretches back to the 19th century. It was first introduced in 1849 during the reign of Queen Victoria as a step toward possible decimalization. Since it represented 1/10 of a pound, it was thought of as a convenient step in converting the currency to a decimal-based system. The 1962 issue belongs to the Elizabethan series, struck after Queen Elizabeth II's succession to the throne in 1952, and part of the standard coinage used throughout the United Kingdom until decimalization in 1970. The 1962 2 shillings coin, also known as a florin, was part of the pre-decimal British currency system that existed before the United Kingdom adopted decimalization in 1971. The coin's denomination, 2 shillings, was equivalent to 1/10 of a pound sterling, or 24 old pence in the old system, where 12 pence made a shilling and 20 shillings made a pound. The florin itself has a rich historical background that stretches back to the 19th century. It was first introduced in 1849 during the reign of Queen Victoria as a step toward possible decimalization. Since it represented 1/10 of a pound, it was thought of as a convenient step in converting the currency to a decimal-based system. The 1962 issue belongs to the Elizabethan series, struck after Queen Elizabeth II's succession to the throne in 1952, and part of the standard coinage used throughout the United Kingdom until decimalization in 1971. The obverse front of the 1962 florin bears the portrait of Queen Elizabeth, designed by. The obverse front of the 1962 florin bears the portrait of Queen Elizabeth designed by Mary, a prominent sculptor whose youthful and graceful effigy of the Queen was used on British coins from 1953 until 1970. The design shows the Queen facing right, wearing a laurel wreath in her hair rather than a crown, symbolizing victory, peace, and the fresh optimism of the new Elizabethan era. Around the portrait appears the Latin legend, Elizabeth Dei Gratia FD, which expands to Elizabeth, by the grace of God, Queen, Defender of the Faith. The abbreviation FD stands for Defensor, a title originally granted to King Henry VIII by the Pope in 1521 and retained by subsequent British monarchs even after the Reformation, signifying the sovereign's role as protector of the Church of England. This Latin inscription and its placement continued a centuries-old British numismatic tradition, symbolizing both the monarchy's continuity and the sovereign's divine right to rule under God's grace. The reverse back of the coin, designed by Edgar Fuller and modeled by Cecil Thomas, features a distinctive Tudor rose at the center, a traditional emblem of England that combines the red rose of Lancaster and the white rose of York, symbolizing unity after the Wars of the Roses. Surrounding the rose are 4 national floral emblems: the thistle of Scotland, the shamrock of Ireland, and the leek of Wales, all intertwined to represent the unity of the nations within the United Kingdom. Around the outer edge is the inscription, FID Def 2 shillings 1962, with FID Def repeating part of the Latin title for Defender of the Faith. The combination of these emblems and inscriptions reflects the post-war sense of British unity, tradition, and identity that characterized early Elizabethan coinage, while still carrying forward designs and values established in earlier reigns. The edge of the coin is milled, with fine grooves that both clipping, the illegal shaving of small amounts of metal from the edges, and a tactile distinction from other denominations. In terms of composition, the 1962 2 shillings coin was struck in cupronickel, an alloy made of 75% copper and 25% nickel, giving it a silvery appearance, but no actual precious metal content. Earlier florins, up to 1946, contained silver, usually 50% silver between 1920 and 1946, but post-war economic realities and the rising cost of silver led to the adoption of cupronickel beginning in 1947. The coin has a diameter of about 28.5 millimeters and a weight of 11.3 grams, making it a fairly substantial coin in the hand. Despite being made of base metal, its well-struck relief and classic design have made it a favorite among collectors, particularly those interested in the transitional period before Britain's decimalization. In the broader historical context, 1962 sits in the middle of Queen Elizabeth II's early reign, during a time of post-war recovery and modernization in Britain. The currency still followed traditions established centuries earlier, with the shilling, florin, and half-crown forming key denominations for everyday transactions. However, By this time, the decimalization debate was growing louder. Decimal currency had been discussed for over a century, and by the 1960s, the idea of simplifying the system to 100 new pence per pound was gaining political and public support. Thus, coins like the 1962 florin represented not only continuity with Britain's numismatic past, but also a bridge to the coming changes of the 1970s. From a numismatic standpoint, the 1962 2 shillings is not considered rare, as millions were minted for everyday circulation by the Royal Mint at Tower Hill and later. However, its charm lies in its symbolism and historical placement rather than scarcity. Collectors often seek examples in uncirculated or proof, where the luster of the cupronickel alloy and the fine details of the floral design can be fully appreciated. The coin marks the end of an era. Although the denomination continued until 1970, it ceased to be produced after decimalization and was demonetized in 1993 when the last remaining pre-decimal coins were withdrawn from circulation. Nevertheless, florins like the 1962 issue are still widely collected, often found in family collections or handed down as keepsakes from older relatives. In summary, the 1962 2 shillings coin of Queen Elizabeth stands as a tangible link between Britain's past and modern age, combining ancient Latin inscriptions, heraldic floral emblems, and the youthful image of a newly crowned monarch with the industrial practicality of mid-metallurgy. Though not of high monetary value today, usually worth a few pounds in circulated condition, its historical and symbolic richness makes it a fascinating artifact of British heritage, encapsulating centuries of tradition, unity, and evolving national identity, all within a simple piece of metal that once jingled in the pockets of everyday citizens. Next top. The 1965 2 shillings coin, often referred to as a florin, is a fascinating piece of British numismatic history, marking the last years before the United Kingdom's shift to decimal currency in 1971. The obverse front of the coin features the portrait of Queen Elizabeth designed by Mary, which was used on British coins from 1953 until 1970. Around the Queen's effigy, the inscription reads, Elizabeth Dei Gratia FD, which is a Latin abbreviation for Elizabeth II, by the grace of God, Queen, Defender of the Faith. The FD stands for Defensor, a title originally granted to English monarchs by the Pope in the 16th century. The reverse back of the coin carries the denomination 2 shillings, along with the year 1965 and the Tudor rose at its center, surrounded by a design incorporating thistles, shamrocks, and leeks, symbols representing England, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales respectively, designed by Edgar Fuller and Cecil Thomas. In terms of specifications, the 1965 2 shillings coin was minted in cupronickel, a blend of 75% copper and 25% nickel, as silver had been phased out of British circulating coinage after 1946. The coin has a diameter of 28.5 millimeters, a weight of 11.3 grams, and a milled, reeded edge. It was part of the pre-decimal British monetary system, where £1 sterling, £1 equaled 20 shillings, and each shilling was worth 12 pence, making the florin equal to 24 pence, or 1/10 of a pound. Although 2 shillings might not seem like much today, in 1965 it had the purchasing power equivalent to several pounds in modern money, enough to buy small household goods, cinema tickets, or several pints of milk. The 1965 issue is particularly notable because it falls during the reign of Queen Elizabeth II's early years, just over a decade after her coronation in 1953. It was also a time of cultural and economic change in Britain, post-war recovery, the rise of the Beatles, and growing modernization, so coins from this era capture a snapshot of that transitional period. Numismatically, the 1965 2 shillings coin is not rare, as millions were minted for everyday circulation, but it still holds sentimental and historical value for collectors, especially those interested in pre-decimal British currency. Well-preserved examples, uncirculated or proof coins, may carry higher collector value, particularly if stored without wear or corrosion. This coin also represents an important stage in the evolution of British coinage. The florin was originally introduced in 1849 under Queen Victoria as part of an early experiment toward decimalization, its value, 2 shillings, being exactly 1/10 of a pound. By 1965, the florin had become a familiar denomination, bridging the gap between the old pound SD system, pounds, shillings, and pence, and the decimal system that was officially introduced in 1971. Interestingly, after decimalization, the florin continued to circulate as the 10 new pence coin, since it shared nearly the same size and value, 2 shillings equals 10 new pence. This meant that the 1965 2 shillings coin remained legal tender in the UK until 1993, when the smaller 10p coins fully replaced them. Overall, the 1965 2 shillings FID-def coin of Queen Elizabeth II is a small but rich artifact of British heritage. It embodies Latin tradition, royal symbolism, national unity through its floral emblems, and a bridge between two monetary eras. Whether you hold it as a keepsake, a collector's piece, or a relic of family history, it tells a story not only of a coin but of a nation in transition, rooted in centuries of monarchy, yet moving toward modernity. Next.
Top.
The 1967 2 shillings coin, commonly known as the florin, is a pre-decimal British coin that was part of the United Kingdom's currency system before the nation switched to decimal currency in 1971. The term 2 shillings means the coin was worth 1/10 of a pound sterling or 24 old pence, since there were 12 pence in a shilling. The coin from 1967 is one of the final issues of the florin series before decimalization, making it both historically and numismatically significant. On the obverse, front, side of the coin, it bears the portrait of Queen Elizabeth I, designed by Mary. Around her effigy is the Latin inscription, Elizabeth Difd, which expands to Elizabeth by the grace of God, Queen, Defender of the Faith. This inscription reflects the traditional titles held by British monarchs since the Tudor period, with FD Defensor, a title originally granted to Henry VIII by the Pope. The portrait of the young queen is one of the most recognizable designs of early Elizabethan coinage, symbolizing continuity and the optimism of post-war Britain. On the reverse side, the 1967 florin displays a Tudor rose in the center, surrounded by 4 national emblems, a thistle for Scotland, a shamrock for Ireland, and 3 lions for England, all interwoven in a decorative design created by Edgar Fuller and Cecil Thomas. Around the design appears the inscription, FID-def 2 shillings 1967, reaffirming the monarch's role as defender of the faith and identifying the denomination and year of minting. The edge of the coin is milled with small grooves to help prevent counterfeiting and clipping, a common practice in earlier centuries when coins were made of precious metals. However, by 1967, the coin was struck in 75% copper, 25% nickel, as silver had been removed from British coinage in 1947. The coin weighs about 11.3 grams and has a diameter of 28.5 millimeters. Historically, the florin was introduced in 1849 during the reign of Queen Victoria, originally as an experiment in decimalization, representing 1/10 of a pound sterling. The denomination proved so practical that it remained in circulation for over 120 years, right up until decimalization in 1971, when it was replaced by the 10 new pence, which was equal in value and size. The 1967 issue was particularly notable because it was one of the most widely minted British coins of the time. It was produced in huge quantities to meet demand, as no florins were minted in 1968 or 1969 while the Royal Mint prepared for the transition to decimal currency. For this reason, the 1967 florin is not rare and generally has modest collector value, though it remains a fascinating artifact of Britain's monetary evolution. Beyond its monetary role, the 1967 2 shillings coin represents a snapshot of mid-British identity, a blend of tradition, heraldry, and modern production. It stands as a symbolic bridge between the Victorian decimal experiments and the full decimalization of the 1970s. For collectors and historians, it serves as a tangible reminder of a time when British coins carried not just economic value but artistic, national, and linguistic heritage. The Latin inscriptions, national emblems, and elegant design together tell a story of monarchy, faith, and unity across the United Kingdom, encapsulated in a small yet beautifully crafted piece of metal that passed through countless hands during the twilight years of Britain's pre-decimal.